So, of course, we start with the Crows up against the Demons. It was a tough contest through a majority of the afternoon. It ebbed and flowed throughout the evening. Both teams had a lot of chances, but in the end, the Crows just proved too strong, running away winners in the end by 13 points. 90 to the Crows, 77 to the D's. Now, we'll get to the injury concern from this game, which was Josh Rochelle. Unfortunately, landed awkwardly in a marking contest in the second quarter and was immediately grabbed for his knee. Now, he was subbed out of the game just before halftime, but in some good news, he was able to run off the ground, but the dreaded ACL injury could be on the cards. Let's just hope that's not the case. But getting to the game itself, and it was a story of missed opportunities in the opening term from both teams, especially with Melbourne. And even though both teams had an even inside 50 count at the first break, Melbourne had 1 goal, 6 to their name. And at the quarter time siren, Adelaide did hold a slender 3-point advantage heading into the second term. But when the next quarter began, the Demons were scintillating. Melbourne kicked 5 goals in the space of 12 minutes to start the second term. Their pressure was immense, and the Crows simply couldn't get their hands on the football as the D's were playing out of their skin. However, eventually Adelaide finally stopped the rot midway through the second term. And that just seemed to get the Crows up and about as they finished with the last 3 goals of the half, and despite missing a few chances, were only down by 5 points at the main break. And with the Crows coming off some good form in the latter parts of the second quarter, they look back to their best selves in the third term. They kicked 5 of the first 6 goals to push out to a team-high 20-point lead, and despite Melbourne getting a goal back late, the Crows still held a 15-point advantage heading into the final change. And in the final term, in the early parts of it, the game really opened up. However, Melbourne did well to keep in touch for the majority of the final term, and with 5 minutes left, they still found themselves 15-point in arrears. But in the end, that's pretty much as close as they got, as the Crows held strong in the final moments and got a great win to keep their top 4 hopes alive. So well done to Adelaide. It was a real finals-like atmosphere throughout the majority of the afternoon, so very good job for them to stand up in some of the big moments. I would be a little bit concerned about the fact that their midfield battle, they were beaten up on in the second term, so they need to really fix that up if they're going to be able to beat the big teams in the final series. But overall, a good win. And on Melbourne, really tough performance from them. However, couldn't find the true quality in the final quarter when they really needed it, and unfortunately, probably their downfall in the end. But let's get to the statistics of this game. Of course, on the multiple goal kickers for Adelaide, Rankin with 5, 2 goals to Keys, Fogarty and Walker. For Melbourne, 4 to Melksham, 2 to Pickett and Van Rooyen. On the disposals for Adelaide, 25 to Peatling and Dawson, 23 to Keys, 21 to Saligo and Laird. And for Melbourne, 30 to Viney, 26 to Bowie, 25 to Langdon, 24 to Pickett, 23 to Petrarca. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, for the Crows, Rankin with the even 100, Saligo 95, 90 to Peatling and Dawson, 86 to Keys. And for the D's, Viney with a 120, 103 to May, 99 to Turner and Langdon, and 97 to Max Gawn. Now, of course, before we get to the votes for this game, of course, we have to mention the members' vote for round 16. How the members' vote works for you guys. For the review in 2025, a 3-2-1 voting system is awarded for every single game of the AFL season on the channel. And each round, players who receive 3 votes in the game have a chance to get a bonus vote. I will decide the 4 best players from the round who will enter a poll exclusive for channel members to vote on, and the winner of that poll will receive the bonus vote for the round, the members' vote. And at the end of the 2025 AFL season, every vote counts. So this is your chance to have your say on the 3rd ever Boundary Riders medalist. So if that appeals to you, or if you just want to show some extra support on the channel, then make sure to click the channel membership link down below and join in the fun. But for now, let's get back into the video. And the members' vote for round 16 went to young Bulldogs star in Joel Frazier. So now let's get to the votes for this game. 3 votes Isaac Rankin, 2 votes Mark Keane, and the 1 vote to Daniel Turner. Isaac Rankin kicked the 5 goals, was the real difference maker, I think, in the end. He's played a little bit more up forward in more recent times, and I don't know if that's going to be his preferred role going into the rest of the year. I do like him through the midfield, but when you kick 5 goals, not much you can complain about that. A great job from him, deserved the 3 votes. Mark Keane, I would almost say he's in All-Australian form right now. What a performance he had, 12 intercept possessions. For a player who's playing almost full back, he still had 4 score involvements, and has been brilliant for the Crows this year down back. Has been a real leader down there. And Daniel Turner, really liked his performance for Melbourne. He had 7 intercept marks, 10 intercept possessions, 336 metres gained, and was very good in the air for them throughout the majority of the afternoon with the 16 marks. So well done from him. So now we head to the SCG. The Swans up against Fremantle. Probably the biggest game of the round, I would say. And in the end, the Swans were just too good, led all day, held Fremantle at bay and won by 11 points. 94 to Sydney, 83 to the Dockers. Now, there were a couple of injury concerns from this game on Sydney's point of view. First of all, Tom Papley went for a run through the middle of the ground in the second quarter, pulled up a bit short and did come off the ground with a hamstring injury, and he was subbed out at halftime. And Joel Amartey seemed to have hurt his groin in the dying stages of the contest in a marking attempt, so we'll have to keep an eye out on that in the coming days. But getting to the game itself, and it was a good start to this game, with different play styles being in full effect from both teams. Fremantle being a lot more methodical with the football, while Sydney were all about pressure. It was almost finals-like throughout the opening term. However, with Sydney kicking a goal on the quarter-time siren, they did lead by a kick at the first change. And the game continued to be an arm wrestle in the second quarter. It was goal for goal, and neither team were giving an inch. But the Swans were able to kick the last 2 goals of the first half, and at the main change, they were up by 17 points. Now, Fremantle kicked an early goal to start the second half, but the Swans had opportunities to kick away early in the third quarter, but with 3 behinds in a row, it gave the Dockers a chance. And with Fremantle kicking 3 of the last 4 goals heading into the final break, the Swans' lead was reduced to 8 points. Now, Sydney were able to kick the first goal of the final term, but this game was nowhere near over. Fremantle were well and truly up for the fight as they kicked the next 2 goals and were within 1 point. It was the closest they had been since the opening minutes of the contest. Unfortunately for the Dockers though, from that point on, they couldn't find the big sticks to take the lead, and Sydney were clinical in front of goal. Freo's missed shots on goal in the final term proved costly, and in the end, Sydney were able to record a big win as they keep their faint finals hopes alive. So well done to the Swans, they were in front the whole day, probably deserved to win it in the end. And I really have to commend Sydney's pressure game. It was probably the best they've seen all year. Really promising signs for the Swans going into the rest of the year. I probably think they're too far away from finals, but still some promising signs going ahead. Non-Fremantle, a real costly loss in the end. They never looked likely to take the lead in this game despite being close throughout the whole afternoon, and this may really cost them in the end if they do miss out on the finals, because it's going to be very tight between 8th and 9th going into the rest of the season. But now let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for Sydney, McLean with 3, 2 goals to Amartey, Lloyd and James Jordan. For Fremantle, Tracy and Jackson both with the 2. On the disposals for the Swans, Mills with 26, Goulden 25, Warner 24, 21 to Heaney, 20 to Grundy. And for Freo, O'Driscoll 26, 24 to Brayshaw, 22 to Wagner, 21 to Ryan and 20 to Johnson. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, for the Swans, Goulden 127, Grundy 113, Lloyd with a 110, Chad Warner with the 97 and Mills with the 95. And for Fremantle, Wagner 107, Jackson with the 89, 86 to Ryan, 85 to Brayshaw and O'Driscoll. But now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, James Jordan, 2 votes, Errol Goulden, and the 1 vote to Brodie Grundy. James Jordan, what a performance. It may not say it too much on the statistics, but he was instrumental in this performance for the Swans today. I said it during the tips that if James Jordan can shut down Caleb Sarong, they'll win this game, and it really played out to full fruition. James Jordan shut down Caleb Sarong and kicked 2 goals of his own as well, so he's great down both ends on his defensive acts and his attacking play as well. Was so good, deserved the 3 votes in my opinion. Errol Goulden, what a return since he's came back for the Swans. It's been so good for them. Was very good today. Probably will get the 3 Brownlow votes if I'm being honest, but not going to get the 3 votes in the Boundary Riders medal. And Brodie Grundy, we've been singing his praises throughout the last few weeks, and he was so good today once again. 20 touches and a goal. So on Saturday night, we had the Saints up against Hawthorn. It was a tough, grinding sort of contest at Marvel Stadium, but in the end, the Hawks came out the winners, winning by 20 points. 94 to the Hawks, 74 to the Saints. Now, there was one injury concern from this one, which was to Jimmy Webster. Unfortunately, had an issue with his calf in the second term, and he was subbed out soon after. But getting to the game itself, and the Hawks started really well through the middle of the ground, but missed a lot of early chances. Now, they eventually did kick the opening goal of the game. However, St Kilda did win a lot of the territory battle throughout the opening term, but at the first break, Hawthorn did lead by 9 points. And heading into the second term, the game continued to be less than a spectacle, to say the least. Both teams couldn't kick straight in the first half of the second term, but on St Kilda's point of view, they continued to get the ball inside their forward 50, but just couldn't find a goal. The Hawks finally did find the first goal of the second term. However, this finally saw the Saints start to kick straight for the first time in the game, as they got the next 2 goals to be within a point. But with Hawthorn kicking the last 3 goals of the first half, they did take an 18-point lead into the main break. Now, St Kilda started strongly in the third quarter as their pressure was immense and they dominated the early inside 50 count. But again, they couldn't find the big sticks. They kicked 4 behinds in a row and Hawthorn made them pay on the other end. The Hawks kicked the first 2 goals of the second half to push out to a game-high lead, and even though St Kilda started to kick straight as they headed into the 3-quarter time break, Hawthorn kicked 5 goals straight throughout the third term and took a comfortable 26-point lead heading into the final change. And in the last quarter, not a lot changed throughout the contest. It was goal for the either side for the entirety of the final term, and in the end, Hawthorn grinded out through a tough contest to record a very big win in their finals aspirations. So Hawthorn, well done to them. They've got some really good wins over the last few weeks, so they are pushing for a top 4 spot. It may be a bridge too far, but overall, I think they're going to be a tough team to beat for the rest of the year. And St Kilda, hopefully they can get a couple of these grinding wins towards the end of the season, but overall, a pretty disappointing year. So now let's get to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Saints, Max Hall with the 3, Higgins with the 2. For the Hawks, Gunston with 3, 2 goals to Chol and Watson. On the disposals for St Kilda, Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller with 43 disposals, Winhager with 27 along with Hall, McRae and Steele with the 26. And for Hawthorn, Battle with 23, 22 to Newcomb and Impey, 21 to Amon, 20 to Meek. And finally on the AFL fantasy front, for the Saints, Wanganeen-Miller with the 145, Marshall with the 140, Steele with the 130, Hall with the 124, and McRae with the 123. And for Hawthorn, Meek with the 138, 100 to Impey, 92 to Newcomb, 91 to D'Ambrosio, and 88 to Josh Battle. So now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, 2 votes Max Hall, and the 1 vote to Josh Battle. So I think even though St Kilda lost, I think the 2 best players on the ground were St Kilda players. I think Hawthorn played a lot more as a collective throughout the night. But Naz, I don't know how much more money he wants to put onto his contract. He may be the highest paid player by the end of the season. What a couple of weeks he is having. Tonight he had 43 touches, 33 of them being kicks, 1,000 metres gained, 11 score involvements from halfback. He was instrumental in their performance tonight to keep them in the game, so deserved a lot of credit for his performance. Max Hall has had an underrated last month or so for St Kilda. Had 5 clearances tonight, 587 metres gained, 9 score involvements, also hit the scoreboard with the 3 goals and 27 touches. You can't ask much more than that. For a player that's played less than 20 games, what a performance from him. And Josh Battle was very good down back for the Hawks tonight. Against his former side as well, had 9 intercept possessions, had the most disposals on the ground for Hawthorn as well, was a real pillar in the back half, and I think St Kilda definitely miss him down there for them. Now the other game on Saturday night, of course, was the Lions up against Port Adelaide at the Gabba, and Port Adelaide started okay, but Brisbane blitzed them in the latter stages of the opening term, and that's really what broke the game in the end, as the Lions, coming off the bye, had a good win, winning by 28 points. 120 to the Lions, 92 to the Power. Now it was injury carnage for Port Adelaide throughout the night. First of all, Dante Vicentini in the opening term went up for a ruck contest, and on the landing, his ankle jarred, and unfortunately he was subbed out in the early stages of the first quarter. Asava Radikalia leaped forward in a defensive marking contest to spoil, and in the follow-through injured his hamstring, which saw him ruled out at quarter time. And Sam Powell-Pepper, probably the most serious injury of them all, hurt his knee in the third term, and unfortunately it seems very likely that it is an ACL to the opposite knee that he injured from last year, so really sad news for Port Adelaide on injury fronts, but Sam Powell-Pepper probably the biggest of them all. But getting to the game itself, was a good start for Port Adelaide on the scoreboard as they kicked the first 2 goals of the contest. The pressure was higher and it seemed up for the fight. However, in the last 15 minutes of the opening term, the Lions blitzed the Power. Brisbane kicked 7 goals in a row to take a 32-point lead into quarter time, and the Lions would make it 8 in a row in the early stages of the second term. Now, Port Adelaide finally stopped the rot soon after, and were able to kick the last 3 goals of the first half to reduce their deficit to 21 points in the major break. And in the second half, the margin of the game hovered around 20 to 40 points for the majority of the contest. Every time Port Adelaide tried to force their way back into the game, Brisbane would kick away. Now, the Lions kicked 4 of the first 5 goals in the third term to push out to a game-high lead, but again, like I said, Port Adelaide wouldn't let the margin blow out too far. At 3/4 time, Brisbane led by 28 points, and not much changed in the final term. Brisbane continued to be a tier above Port Adelaide, and in the end, that 7-goal blitz from Brisbane in the opening term was pretty much the difference between the two sides. So Brisbane did really well to get that nice little blitz in that first quarter, really split the two sides. We'll get to a couple of the good players in a moment, but Brisbane just seemed a class above from Port Adelaide. And on the Power, I think it's probably the end from Ken Hinkley coming up now. I think it's all he's got out of this side. I think they were very good tonight, and if it wasn't for that little patch in the first quarter, they probably would have been a lot closer throughout the end of the game. But in the end, Brisbane were just too good. So now let's get to the stats in this one, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for Brisbane, 5 goals to Zach Bailey, 3 goals to Cameron. For Port Adelaide, Georgiades with 4, 3 goals to Lukosius and Rioli, 2 goals to Powell-Pepper. On the disposals for Brisbane, McCluggage, Neal with the 29, Bailey with 26, 23 to Zorko and Ashcroft. And for the Power, Rosie and Butters with the 31, 27 to Boak, 22 to Wines and 21 to Drew. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front for the Lions, 108 to McCluggage, 107 to Bailey, 106 to Neal, 79 to Zorko, 78 to Dunkley. And for Port Adelaide, Butters 119, Rosie 111, Sweet 97, 94 to Boak and 88 to Ollie Wines. So now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Zach Bailey, 2 votes, Hugh McCluggage, and the 1 vote to Zach Butters. What a performance from Zach Bailey, arguably his best game of his career. 5 goals and 26 touches. You don't see that very often anymore, so what a performance from him. If he can continue this sort of form going into the rest of the year, I could definitely see Brisbane being really high up there. I think he's a really underrated player for the Lions, and I think he's a real barometer for them, so really good job from him. Hugh McCluggage, I think he's in all-Australian form right now. I don't think anyone can compete with the midfield run that he has. One of the best two-way runners in the competition, in my opinion, and was very good tonight. And Zach Butters, I think, was Port Adelaide's best player on the ground. Has been a little bit down over the last month or so, but the last few weeks has really stood up for Port Adelaide, so I think he's definitely increasing his contract talks for the Power going into the next year or so. So on Saturday evening, we had the Cats up against the Tigers down at the Cattery. Don't think many people saw much coming out of this game, and in the end, there wasn't a lot to come out of it at all. The Cats smashed the Tigers, and in the end, won by 72 points. 124 to Geelong, 52 to Richmond. Now, unfortunately, compounding their loss, Richmond had a couple of injuries from this one. First of all, Sam Lawler came off in the opening minutes of the game with a hamstring injury, and unfortunately, he was subbed out of the game soon after. This is his first game back in about 6 to 8 weeks after having a hamstring injury, and unfortunately, he's probably going to miss a lot more games. Probably won't play for the rest of the year. Super unfortunate for him. And Hugo Rouse-Smith also hurt his hamstring in the third term, and he was ruled out of the game just before three-quarter time. Now, getting to the game itself, Richmond did kick the opening goal, and it was the only time they saw the lead for the entire contest. The Cats dominated most facets of the game in the opening term, and even though they only led by 13 points at the first break, it felt like this game was heading towards the Tigers being on the end of an absolute thumping. And in the second term, those thoughts came to fruition as Geelong were on a mission to put this game to bed. They smashed the Tigers with the Cats kicking 8 goals to 1, and at halftime, Geelong had Richmond broken as they led by 59 points. And it could have honestly been a lot more as Geelong kicked 8 goals 6 throughout the second term. Now, Richmond, to their credit, did well in the second half to not let the game blow out to an absolutely massive margin, because this game had all the hallmarks of a 100-point thumping. But in the end, it felt like the Cats put the cue on the rack in the second half, and this game was a true example of a class difference between these two teams. So Geelong got a nice percentage boosting win, not really a lot to take out of this one, and Richmond, they just seem a little bit tired at the moment after a lot of really positive signs at the start of the year. I think after the bye, they've shown that they're definitely a young side who is going to struggle to win any more games this season. But let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Cats, we had Jeremy Cameron with the 4 goals, 3 goals to Neil, 2 goals to Close, Bowes, and Dangerfield. For Richmond, sole multiple goal kicker was Ryan Mansell with the 3. On the disposals for Geelong, Holmes with the 36, 29 to Myers, 25 to Martin and Guthrie, Stevens on debut with the 21, and for Richmond, Hopper with 26 along with Banks, 25 to Taranto, 22 to Mansell, and 21 to Vlosten. And finally on the AFL fantasy front, for the Cats, Zach Guthrie with the 125, Holmes 122, Jeremy Cameron with the 117, Atkins 109, Martin 107, and for Richmond, Banks with the 113, 108 to Mansell, 107 to Nankervis, 98 to Rioli, and 86 to Hopper. So now let's get to the votes. 3 votes Jezza Cameron, 2 votes Brian Myers, and the 1 vote to Max Holmes. Jeremy Cameron, he does get the 3 votes here, but he could have had, I don't know, you could have got double for the amount of opportunities he had at goal today. 4 goals, 5. I don't know what he is doing. He could have taken an outright lead on the Coleman. I think he's going to win it anyway, but he's got to find a way to kick straighter. 4 goals, 5. It doesn't really matter in the end, but still should have done a little bit better in front of goal. Brian Myers has had a great last few weeks this season. Had a pretty poor start, I would say. Probably lowered his colours a little at the start of the season, but now is really coming into his own. As you would expect, had a lot of scorer involvement. Every single time he went forward, never really looked at the goals, always looked for a teammate, and such an unselfish player, so really good job from him. And Max Holmes, he seems to really stand up when Bailey Smith is out with a late withdrawal or something, and he was really good today. Had 36 touches, led for the team, 7 marks, and was good all around the ground. So to start the games on Saturday, we had the Bombers up against the Gold Coast Suns. Essendon coming off the bye, put up a pretty spirited performance, but in the end, the Suns kicked away in the final term to win by 41 points. 74 to the Dons, 115 to the Suns. Now, there was one injury concern from this game, which was Jai Caldwell. Had his ankle caught under an opponent in a tackle early in the final term. Now, he did hobble off the ground. Unfortunately, it was ruled out soon after. Now, I'm a little bit unsure if this was precautionary or if it was actually a serious injury, because the game was well and truly done by the time he was about to come back onto the ground if he was able to. So we'll just have to wait and see throughout the week. Getting to the game itself, and to start this game, it was a hot and frenetic game of football. The pressure from both teams was extremely high, and neither team could control the football much at all. And heading into the first break, with both teams being pretty even, we saw the Suns hold a 1-point lead. Now, the pressure did drop off a little bit from Essendon early in the second term. However, they did have a lot of chances in the first 10 minutes of the quarter. However, they weren't able to register a goal, kicking 4 straight behinds. And down the other end, the Gold Coast made them pay, as the Suns kicked the first 2 goals of the quarter. However, Essendon started to get their way back into the contest in the second half of the second term and got their kicking boots on, as they kicked 2 late goals to take the lead with a minute left to play in the half. However, as they did in the first quarter, they conceded a late goal heading into the major break as well, with the Suns leading by 4 points. Now, the game really opened up to start the second half on the scoreboard. We saw 7 goals kicked between both the teams, but Essendon were well and truly up for the fight as they were able to take the lead halfway through the third term, courtesy of a 3-goal burst from mid-season draftee and Archer May. However, both teams traded goals heading into the final change, with the Suns just holding a 3-point lead, setting up for an intriguing final term. Now, the Gold Coast started strongly in the final quarter as they kicked the first 3 goals to push out to a game-high 22-point lead, and in the end, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. The Suns kicked away in the final quarter, and with this win, they consolidated their spot in the top 8. So well done to the Suns as they were well and truly challenged today, but really stood up when they needed to, and in the end, they were able to find something from their leaders to kick away in the final term. And Essendon, they fought really hard, but their injuries are well and truly stacking up now. May have another one with Jai Caldwell today, so hopefully they can continue putting in some big games throughout the rest of the season, but it's going to be tough for them. But let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Dons, Caddy and May both with the 3. For the Suns, King with 4, 3 to Reid, 2 to Humphrey and Anderson. On the disposals for Essendon, Merritt with 40, 27 to Durham, 22 to Martin and Setterfield, and Roberts with the 20. And for the Suns, Jeffrey with 32, Anderson 30, 29 to Noble, 25 to Miller, and 24 to Flanders. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Bombers, 145 to Merritt, 88 to Setterfield, 86 to Durham, 79 to Roberts and Kako. And for the Gold Coast, Jeffrey 132, Anderson 122, Noble 111, Rao with the 103, and Fiorini with the 100. But now, let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes Zach Merritt, 2 votes Joel Jeffrey, and the 1 vote to Noah Anderson. I said it through the week during the tips for that video that Zach Merritt needs to play midfield, and he predominantly did that today. Was all over the ground, finally responded after a pretty poor 6 weeks, so they really needed him in the midfield, and he led from the front for the majority of this game. I think he was the best on the ground and kept the Bombers in it throughout the entire day. Joel Jeffrey really loving his role off a halfback this year. 32 touches, 10 marks, and 3 tackles. Also hit the scoreboard with a goal. Really loving his year so far. And Noah Anderson had a pretty quiet first half, but when he needed to respond in the second half, he really came through. 30 touches and 2 goals. Great captain's game from him and led from the front. So now we get to the lesser talked about game on Friday night, which was the West Coast Eagles up against the Giants. And as most people would have expected, this game headed down a pretty obvious track as the Giants ran out pretty comfortable winners in the end by 59 points. 52 to the Eagles, 111 to the Giants. Now there was one injury concern from this game, which was to GWS and Jack Buckley. He sustained an injury to his ankle in the third term and he was subbed out just before 3/4 time. He was seen limping heavily after the game as well, so a big concern there for the Giants. Hopefully he's all good because they're still suffering with the injury to Sam Taylor at the moment. Getting to the game itself, and what a start from the Giants coming off the bye last week. GWS kicked the first 4 goals of the game, and the home side didn't even look like scoring. Now, despite the teams trading some goals heading into the first break, GWS did lead by 27 points. Now, the game became a little bit of a stalemate to start the second term, with the Giants kicking the only goal of the first half of the quarter. And then we did see a late flurry of goals heading into the main break, but the GWS still held sway as they led by 35 points. And heading into the second half, the game headed down a pretty similar trajectory. The Eagles did find a few goals throughout the second half, but overall the game never became a spectacle. In the end, GWS did what they had to do. They got a nice percentage boosting win, while the Eagles looked destined for a second wooden spoon in 3 years. So overall, I mean, I am glossing over a lot of this game, but I'm going to be honest with you, it wasn't much of a spectacle whatsoever. The Giants did what they had to do. They got a nice win. They have to keep on increasing their percentage because that may be the difference between 9th and 8th this year. So well done to them. And the Eagles, there are some promising signs out there. I did like a few players of theirs. They're younger players, but overall, a pretty disappointing finish to the year, I think it's going to be. But let's get to the statistics of this one, of course. On the multiple goal kickers, the sole multiple for the Eagles was Shanahan with the 2. For the Giants, 3 goals to Toby Green, 2 goals to Jones, O'Halloran, Cadman, and Kelly. On the disposals for the West Coast, Duggan with 28, 24 to Harley Reid, 21 to Hewitt, 22 Marek, and 19 to McCarthy. And for GWS, Finn Callahan with a 37, Tom Green with a 35, 29 to Ash, 27 to Kelly and O'Halloran. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Eagles, Duggan with the 116, Reid with the 97, 83 to Hoff, 78 to Shanahan and 76 to McCarthy. And for GWS, Callahan with the 120, 109 to Kelly, 104 to Tom Green, 103 to Briggs and 103 as well to O'Halloran. But now let's get to the votes of this game. 3 votes, Finn Callahan, 2 votes, Josh Kelly, and the 1 vote to Toby Green. This is almost a career best game for Finn Callaghan, in my opinion. I think I am going to take a little bit into account their opponents, because I think he had a better game in opening round against the Pies, but what a performance he had. 37 touches, kicked a goal, 4 marks. What an important player he is for GWS. I didn't really think he was as important as he was, but since his return, the Giants have got on a winning streak, and I think he has been one of the huge catalysts in that reason, so well done to him. Josh Kelly, probably his best game of the year so far, 27 touches, kicked 2 goals. Really liked his performance. Did come off a little bit in the final term, but the game was well and truly done by that point. Pretty similar circumstances to Toby Green. Had a brilliant first 3 quarters of the game. A little bit of a push and shove with Harley Reid throughout the contest, but overall, think he was very, very good. Led from the front throughout the night. So now to one of the more anticipated games of the round. It was the Blues up against Collingwood, and after a pretty even first half, Collingwood kicked away in the third quarter and sent their old foes home with an absolute shellacking, winning in the end the Pies by 56 points. 59 to the Blues, 115 to Collingwood. Now there's one injury concern from this one, which was Zach Williams. Received a knock to his knee in the third quarter, and unfortunately he was subbed out at 3-quarter time. Really unfortunate for Zach, as he was probably Carlton's best player in the first 3 quarters. But getting to the game itself, and it was a great start for Collingwood as they kicked the first 2 goals of the game, and the signs didn't look great for the Blues in the early stages of this one. However, they did respond soon after, as Carlton kicked the next 2 goals in response and drew level. And for the remainder of the first quarter, the Blues largely dominated the territory battle. However, they wasted a lot of opportunities going in their forward half, and when it went down the other end, the Pies made them pay. And at the first break, Collingwood did lead by 6 points. But after the first 3 goals of the second term, the Pies threatened to put this game to bed at the main break. Now, Carlton did well to stem the bleeding, to not let the margin blow out to an insurmountable level. However, with only 1 goal in the second term, the Blues did face a 24-point deficit heading into the major break. And once the third quarter began, the Pies looked to embarrass their old foes. Collingwood kicked away in the third term with 8 goals to Carlton's only 2, and heading into the final change, Collingwood led by 60 points. And even though in the final term, Carlton actually did win it, it didn't really help much for an insipid performance from Carlton, as the Pies won comfortably to strengthen their position on top of the AFL ladder. So well under Collingwood, they are 10 points on top. And on Carlton's point of view, what a terrible performance. I thought they would respond. I didn't think they were going to win, but I thought they'd put in a performance. But after halftime, that was embarrassing. And I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think the option is to sack Michael Voss. I think they have to change a lot more than just changing the coach once again. I think it's a similar trajectory they have been doing over the last 10 or so years. So I think they need to do something else to change. Maybe that's a huge list overhaul. We'll just have to wait and see. But overall, the performance itself was embarrassing. So let's move to the statistics of this game. On the multiple goal kickers for the Blues, Williams with the 3, Motlop with the 2. For the Pies, Elliott and McStay both with 4. Mychek and Membry with the 2. On the disposals for Carlton, Chera with 28, Cripps 25, 24 to Hollands, 22 to Doherty, and 20 to Akers. And for Collingwood, Nick Dacos 36, Josh Dacos 27, Mitchell 26, 24 to Crisp, and 22 to Pendlebury. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, for the Blues, Hollands 95, Chera 93, along with Pidnet, 89 to Cowan, 84 to Doherty. And for the Pies, Nick Dacos 132, Cameron with the 115, Crisp with the 109, Maynard with the 104, and Elliott with the 97. So now let's get to the votes. 3 votes Nick Dacos, 2 votes Darcy Cameron, and the 1 vote to Jamie Elliott. He's had a few games like this, Nick Dacos, this year when he's had a really hard tag. John Stewart did go to him when he went to stoppage, but Nick Dacos would drift forward and really impacted on the scoreboard. Had the most score involvements for the game, and all around the ground, it just felt like he was a class above the Carlton midfielders. Had 36 touches, truly led from the front today. And Darcy Cameron, I think he's definitely looking for more money. We did hear reports at the start of the game from John Ralph that he's a little bit disappointed with the offers that the Pies have been giving him. So he just continues to have standout game after standout game. 20 touches, dominated the 2 ruckmen of the Blues tonight. And Jamie Elliott, what a year he is having. Added another 4 goals to his tally throughout the night. Probably should have kicked a lot more. He kicked 3 behinds, but overall, great game from Jamie. So, of course, at the start of the round, we had North Melbourne up against the Western Bulldogs. It was a centenary match for the Roos. Unfortunately, though, the Dogs proved too strong. Kicked away in the second half to win by 49 points. 85 to the Roos, 134 to the Dogs. Now, there was a couple of injury concerns from this game. First of all, we had Luke Davies-Uniacke, who received a knock to his head in the opening term when he was in an awkward position when trying to tackle. He was assessed and subbed out with concussion early in the second term. And Tristan Xerri did have some treatment regarding a possible concussion in the final term. However, it was confirmed post-game that he did not sustain a concussion, so hopefully he's all good for next week. But getting to the game itself, and it was a great start from the Dogs as they kicked the opening 2 goals of the contest, and it was ominous signs early for the Roos. However, it didn't take long for North Melbourne to get things rolling. The Kangas kicked the next 3 goals to take the lead, and in a high-scoring opening term with 9 goals between both sides, it was North Melbourne who held the lead at the first break by 6 points. Now, it was goal for goal to start the second term. However, as the quarter went on, it just felt like the Bulldogs were starting to take over. The Western Bulldogs kicked 4 of the last 5 goals heading into the end of the first half and took a 13-point lead into the halftime break. Now, the Roos came out with a good response to start the second half, as they kicked 3 of the first 4 goals to be within 2 points of the Doggies. However, in a similar story to the second term, the Western Bulldogs would flex their muscles in the second half of the third quarter, as the Dogs kicked 4 of the last 5 goals heading into the final break, as they held a pretty comfortable 22-point lead. And in the final term, North Melbourne seemed all out of sorts. The Dogs kicked away in the fourth quarter with 5 goals to 1, and in the end, the Western Bulldogs were just a class above their opponents as they went on to jump into the top 4 after this game. So what on to the Western Bulldogs? I think they're going to be a real contender this year. They are beating up on teams below them, so they're going to have to start beating teams above when they have that opportunity. But when you have those opponents below you, they're doing exactly what they need to do. They need to smash them, gain their percentage, and they're going to be a really hard team to beat this year. And on North Melbourne, I think they should have done better in the second half. It was a good response after last week's terrible performance, but in the end, it's still another disappointing loss. But let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Roos, Larkey with 5, Zerha with 2. For the Dogs, Norton with 5, Darcy with 4, 2 goals to Bontempelli, English, Dale, and Liberatore. On the disposals for the Roos, McKercher with a 32, 25 to Daniel and Power, 22 to Sheasel, and 20 to Hardiman. And for the Doggies, Liberatore with a 27, Richards 26, Bontempelli and Kennedy with a 25, and Sanders with a 23. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front for the Kangas, 124 to McKercher, 104 to Power, 96 to Cherry, 93 to Sheasel, and Daniel with the 90. And for the Western Bulldogs, Liberatore 138, Bontempelli 133, English 116, Norton 100, and then we had Darcy with the 88. Now, my brother gave the vote to this game. He has gone with 3 votes Liberatore, 2 votes Colby McKercher, and the 1 vote to Marcus Bontempelli. But guys, thanks for watching this episode of the review. I hope you did enjoy it. And if you want to listen to the full episode, then make sure to go check us out on Spotify, as you can listen to the full episode there the morning after the round finishes. But that is all from me, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. But for now, we'll catch you all in the next one.